The year 2347 brought humanity's first contact with alien life, but it was nothing like the peaceful encounter people had imagined for centuries. The massive warships appeared without warning at the edge of the solar system, their hulls darker than the void itself, and stretching for miles in every direction. There were hundreds of them, arranged in perfect military formation, and they came with a message that would change everything. President Helen Carter was in her office in Geneva when the transmission arrived. She had been reviewing reports about the new Mars colony when every screen in the building suddenly switched to the same image. A creature stood before her, tall and covered in dark scales with eyes that glowed like burning embers. The translator built into the transmission rendered its words into perfect English, though the voice carried a grinding, metallic quality that made her skin crawl. The creature identified itself as Admiral Vexthor of the Korthax Empire. He spoke with the casual authority of someone who had delivered this same speech 1,000 times before. The Empire ruled over 300 star systems and had maintained order in this region of the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. Earth and all its colonies now fell within Imperial territory. Humanity had 30 days to surrender completely, hand over all military assets, and begin paying annual tribute of resources and labor. The alternative was the total destruction of every human settlement in the solar system. To prove this was not an empty threat, the Admiral played a recording. Dozens of worlds appeared on the screen, one after another. Beautiful planets with gleaming cities and green forests. Then the images changed. The same worlds, now lifeless. Their cities were melted glass. Their forests were ash. Their oceans had been boiled away. The Admiral's voice continued without emotion as the images played. These were the worlds that had refused to submit. When the transmission ended, Helen sat in silence for a long moment. She had been president for 6 years and had dealt with countless crises, but nothing had prepared her for this. Outside her window, she could see the lights of Geneva sparkling in the evening. Millions of people going about their lives, completely unaware that everything had just changed. She picked up the phone and made the call that would summon the Terran Defense Council. The council met in an underground bunker designed to survive nuclear war. General Kyle Mason arrived first, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. He commanded Earth's Space Defense Force and had spent 20 years preparing for every conceivable threat. But alien invasion had always been theoretical, something for movies and books. Now it was real, and the look on his face showed he understood how outmatched they were. Admiral Lisa Bennett came next, walking with the confident stride of someone who had spent more time in space than on Earth. She commanded the home fleet, 36 warships that represented humanity's best defensive capability. She had watched the alien transmission twice and immediately began running combat simulations. Every scenario ended the same way. Complete defeat in less than 3 hours. Colonel Jake Morrison represented the Mars Defense Force. His colony had only 12 ships, older models that were primarily designed for asteroid mining. He argued loudly that Mars should be evacuated immediately, that trying to fight was suicide. But where would they evacuate to? The aliens controlled the entire region. There was nowhere to run. The debate went on for hours. Some council members wanted to surrender immediately. They argued that living under alien rule was better than extinction. At least humanity would survive. Others refused to even consider submission. They spoke of human dignity, of freedom, of the right to determine their own fate. The arguments grew heated, voices rising, fists pounding on tables. Dr. Paul Griffin sat quietly through most of it. He was the head of Earth's Advanced Research Division, a scientist rather than a soldier. While others argued about weapons and tactics, he had been studying the transmission itself. Not the message, but the technology behind it. The way the alien ships moved, the energy signatures they gave off. He saw something there, a possibility so slim it barely existed, but he needed time to investigate. Captain Ron Hayes was not in the council meeting. He was in space, commanding the Earth defense ship Valiant on routine patrol near Jupiter. When the alert came through, he immediately changed course and headed toward the alien fleet. His orders were simple. Get close enough to gather intelligence, but do not engage. His crew was nervous, checking their weapons repeatedly, even though they all knew those weapons would be useless against such advanced technology. The Valiant approached slowly, using every stealth system they had. The alien fleet was massive, even more intimidating up close. But Hayes was a careful observer, and he noticed patterns. The ships moved in precise formations. They maintained specific distances from each other. Their patrol routes were predictable, almost mechanical. He filed this information away, knowing it might be important later. Back in Geneva, President Carter made a decision that shocked everyone in the council. She announced she would request a face-to-face meeting with Admiral Vexthor. General Mason immediately objected. It was too dangerous. The aliens might take her hostage or simply kill her. But Helen was firm. If they were going to surrender, she would look their conqueror in the eye. And if they were going to fight, she needed to understand their enemy better. To everyone's surprise, Admiral Vexthor agreed to the meeting. A neutral space station was designated, one of the small research outposts humanity had built in the asteroid belt. The Admiral would come with a small honor guard. The President could bring 4 advisors. The meeting would take place in 5 days. Those 5 days became a frenzy of activity. Dr. Griffin worked around the clock in his laboratory, assisted by every scientist who could contribute. He was chasing an idea, something about the way the alien shields operated. The energy frequency was unusual, and if he was right, there might be a way to disrupt it. But he needed more data, more time, more resources than they had. General Mason began quietly mobilizing Earth's defenses. He did not have authorization to prepare for war, not yet, but he could run drills and conduct maintenance. Every ship was checked and rechecked. Weapons were tested. Pilots were briefed on the alien capabilities. If the order came to fight, they would be as ready as possible. Admiral Bennett met with her ship captains in secret. She showed them Captain Hayes's reconnaissance data. She explained that the aliens were powerful but not invincible. They relied on their overwhelming superiority and seemed to expect easy victories. If humanity was going to fight, they would need to be unpredictable, aggressive, and willing to take risks no sane military commander would normally consider. Meanwhile, news of the alien arrival had leaked to the public. Despite government attempts at control, billions of people around the world now knew the truth. Panic spread in some cities. Religious movements proclaimed the end times. But something else happened too. Something unexpected. People began to organize. Factories started running extra shifts without being asked. Engineers volunteered their services. Former soldiers came out of retirement. Humanity was beginning to unite in a way it never had before. On the 5th day, President Carter boarded a shuttle with General Mason, Dr. Griffin, Admiral Bennett, and a young pilot named Lieutenant Amy Cooper, who had flown reconnaissance missions near the alien fleet. They traveled to the space station in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The fate of humanity might be decided in the next few hours, and none of them knew which way it would go. The space station was small and cold, built for research rather than diplomatic meetings. Admiral Vexthor arrived exactly on time with 6 guards who carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. The alien commander was even more imposing in person, standing nearly 8 feet tall with scales that seemed to absorb the light around him. His eyes swept across the human delegation with obvious disdain, the way a person might look at insects. President Helen Carter walked forward without hesitation. She wore a simple suit with no military decorations or symbols of power. Behind her came General Mason, Dr. Griffin, Admiral Bennett, and Lieutenant Cooper. The young pilot carried a small data chip in her hand, holding it carefully as if it contained something precious. The Admiral gestured to chairs that had been arranged in the center of the station. He sat with perfect posture, his guards standing motionless behind him. Helen sat across from him and met his burning gaze without flinching. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing, heavy with unspoken threat and defiance. Vexthor spoke first, his voice carrying that same metallic quality from the transmission. He had come expecting humanity's surrender. 300 worlds had submitted to the Empire, and Earth would be no different. He was prepared to discuss the terms, to outline what resources humanity would provide, how many workers would be conscripted, which military assets would be transferred. He spoke with the bored efficiency of someone completing a routine task. Helen let him finish. Then she did something the Admiral did not expect. She smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the smile of someone who knew something her opponent did not. She activated the holograph display built into the table and began to show him images. Old images from Earth's history, carefully selected and arranged. The first images showed human wars. Not the glorious battles from propaganda, but the brutal reality. Trenches filled with mud and blood, cities reduced to rubble, soldiers fighting over frozen wastelands and burning deserts. The Admiral watched with growing confusion. Why was this primitive leader showing him proof of humanity's weakness and division? Helen began to speak, her voice calm and measured. She explained that humans had never been unified, that they had spent thousands of years fighting each other over land, resources, religions, and ideologies. They had created weapons capable of destroying their own world multiple times over. They had nearly driven themselves to extinction more than once. The Admiral nodded slowly, beginning to understand. This was an admission of defeat, a plea for mercy based on humanity's own violent history. But then Helen changed the images. She showed the aftermath of those wars, cities rebuilt stronger than before, enemies becoming allies, technologies developed under pressure that transformed civilization. She showed humanity reaching for the stars despite every setback, despite every disaster. She explained that humans had one trait that defined them above all others. When pushed to the edge, when given a choice between submission and extinction, they did not break. They adapted. They fought back. They refused to quit even when quitting was the only logical choice. Dr. Griffin stepped forward and added his own observations. He had studied the alien transmission carefully, analyzed the technology behind it. He spoke in technical terms that the Admiral clearly understood, explaining that humanity had already identified potential weaknesses in Korthak's shield systems. It was theoretical, still unproven, but the fact that Earth's primitive scientists had found anything at all seemed to surprise Vexthor. Admiral Bennett described the reconnaissance missions Captain Hayes had conducted. The predictable patrol patterns, the centralized command structure, the reliance on overwhelming force rather than tactical flexibility. She spoke like a professional discussing strategy with another professional, and for the first time, the alien admiral seemed to regard her as something other than a primitive creature. Lieutenant Cooper played the data chip she carried. It contained recordings from Earth's defense simulations, scenarios where the human fleet engaged the Korthak's armada. Every simulation ended in human defeat. The numbers were clear. But the simulations also showed that humanity would not go quietly. They would inflict casualties. They would make the Empire pay for every inch of space. The cost of conquering Earth might be acceptable, but it would not be insignificant. Vexthor listened to all of this with growing irritation. He had conquered dozens of worlds and never encountered such arrogance from a species so clearly outmatched. He stood abruptly, his guards tensing behind him. His voice grew harder, angrier. He had given humanity 30 days to surrender, but he was tired of this pointless display. They had 1 week, 7 days to comply or face complete annihilation. No more meetings, no more negotiations. The Empire's patience was at an end. Helen stood as well, meeting his height with her presence if not her stature. She thanked him for his time with perfect politeness that somehow felt like mockery. As the alien delegation prepared to leave, she said one final thing. Earth would give its answer in 7 days exactly as requested. The answer would be clear and unmistakable. Vexthor departed without responding, his guards following in perfect formation. The human delegation returned to Earth in tense silence. Only when they were safely inside the shuttle did anyone speak. General Mason asked the question they were all thinking. Did the president actually believe they could win? Or was this elaborate performance simply humanity's way of going down fighting? Helen stared out the window at the blue planet below and admitted the truth. She did not know if they could win. But she knew they had to try. Back on Earth, Dr. Griffin immediately returned to his laboratory. He had seen something in the Admiral's reaction when he mentioned the shield frequencies, a flicker of concern quickly hidden. That meant he was on the right track. He gathered every scientist, engineer, and technician he could find. They had 7 days to turn theory into reality, to build weapons that could punch through alien shields even if only for a few seconds. General Mason activated the defense protocols he had been quietly preparing. Every ship was put on full alert. Crews were briefed on their missions, though many details remained classified. He promoted Captain Hayes to lead the reconnaissance squadron and gave him new orders. Get closer to the alien fleet. Gather more data. Be prepared to strike when the moment came. Admiral Bennett began reaching out to every available vessel, military ships, civilian transports, mining craft, anything that could be armed or used as a weapon. She contacted the Mars colony and the stations throughout the asteroid belt. If Earth was going to fight, they would need every resource humanity possessed. A parallel effort began across the planet. Factory workers volunteered for extra shifts without being asked. A civilian engineer named Matt Jennings designed a modification for mining equipment that could turn it into a crude weapon. A software developer named Claire Watson created communication protocols that would keep human forces coordinated even if their command structure was destroyed. All across Earth and its colonies, people who had never met and never would began working toward the same desperate goal. The news media finally reported the full truth to the public. There would be no hiding it anymore. The alien ultimatum was broadcast worldwide. Leaders expected panic, riots, chaos. Instead, something remarkable happened. People became calm, focused, determined. They had 7 days to prepare, and they would not waste a single moment. On the 6th day, Captain Hayes conducted his most dangerous mission yet. He took the Valiant deep into the alien formation, closer than any human ship had gone. His sensors collected massive amounts of data about shield frequencies, weapon capabilities, and command signals. He lost 2 escort ships in the process, good people who volunteered knowing they might not return. Commander Steve Holland and his crew bought Hayes the time he needed with their lives. On the 7th day, Earth sent its answer. President Helen Carter recorded a message that was broadcast on every frequency the aliens used. She did not grovel or beg. She did not threaten or boast. She simply quoted 3 words from an old Earth poem, words that captured everything humanity felt in that moment. Rage, rage, rage. Admiral Vexthor received the message aboard his flagship. He did not understand human poetry, did not grasp the cultural reference. He interpreted it as exactly what it was, a declaration of war. He ordered his fleet to advance on Earth immediately. The primitives would be crushed, their planet would burn, and the galaxy would remember what happened to species who defied the Empire. The Korthax armada began moving toward Earth, hundreds of massive warships accelerating to attack speed. In response, humanity's small fleet moved to intercept positions. Every ship, every weapon, every person who could fight prepared for the battle that would decide their species' fate. The war for Earth was about to begin. The Korthax fleet crossed the orbit of Mars with absolute confidence. Admiral Vexthor positioned his ships in a standard Imperial formation that had crushed resistance on 100 worlds. His vessels moved with mechanical precision, their weapons charging, their shields at full strength. The Admiral expected this battle to last perhaps 2 hours at most. Then Earth would be a lesson written in fire and ash for any other species that considered defiance. What he did not know was that for 7 days and nights, humanity had transformed their solar system into a trap. Every available mind had contributed to the effort. Scientists had worked until they collapsed from exhaustion. Engineers had turned civilian equipment into weapons. Soldiers had trained for scenarios that seemed impossible. The plan was desperate and relied on perfect timing, but it was the only chance they had. The battle began when the alien fleet reached a point between Mars and Earth that humans had marked as the trigger zone. Suddenly, what appeared to be harmless debris and deactivated satellites came to life. These were the sleeper mines that Dr. Griffin had designed, deployed by crews working around the clock. Each mine released a precise electromagnetic pulse on a frequency that Griffin had calculated would disrupt Korthax shields for exactly 4.3 seconds. The mines fired in a coordinated wave, and for those few precious seconds, dozens of alien ships lost their primary defense. In that instant, the Earth fleet struck. Admiral Lisa Bennett commanded from the flagship Liberty, and her orders were simple and brutal. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and keep moving. Human ships that had been hiding in the shadow of Mars roared forward at maximum acceleration. Captain Ron Hayes led the first attack wave in the Valiant. His squadron of 20 ships executed a maneuver they had practiced obsessively for the past week. They called it the Swarm, inspired by ancient naval tactics where smaller vessels would overwhelm a larger enemy. The human ships came from multiple angles simultaneously, targeting specific weak points that Hayes had identified during his reconnaissance missions. Out in their hidden chambers deep underground away from Imperial sensors, they began to whisper. If humans could fight back, perhaps others could too. In the Imperial capital, thousands of light years from Earth, Emperor Korthax IX sat on his throne and listened to reports with growing fury. The destruction of Vexthor's fleet was bad enough, but the political damage was far worse. Subject species across the Empire were becoming restless. Production quotas were not being met. Acts of sabotage were increasing. His generals urged him to respond with overwhelming force, to make an example so brutal that no one would ever consider rebellion again. The Emperor ordered the construction of a new fleet, one 10 times larger than the force that had attacked Earth. 2,000 warships would be assembled, carrying the most advanced weapons the Empire possessed. He would lead them personally to ensure there were no mistakes. Earth would be reduced to molten rock and every human settlement would be erased. The message would be clear. Defy the Empire and face extinction, but building such a fleet would take months, and the Emperor's advisors warned him of the risk. Resources would need to be diverted from other sectors. Conquered worlds would see the massive military buildup and know it was coming. Some advisors quietly suggested that perhaps Earth should be left alone, dismissed as an anomaly not worth the cost. The Emperor refused to even consider it. His pride and the Empire's reputation demanded absolute victory. On Earth, President Helen Carter faced a different problem. They had won the battle, but at a terrible cost. The casualty count was staggering. Admiral Lisa Bennett was dead along with thousands of crew members. The lunar bases were destroyed. Entire squadrons had been wiped out. Debris from the battle posed a danger to anything moving through near-Earth space. The planet had been scarred by falling wreckage, and 3 orbital stations had been lost with all hands. Recovery teams worked around the clock searching for survivors in the debris field. Transport pilot Lisa Turner flew mission after mission, bringing home escape pods that had been drifting for days. Some pods contained living crew members, their life support systems nearly exhausted. Others held only bodies. Each rescue was a small victory, each empty pod another tragedy. Turner flew until she could barely stay awake, driven by the knowledge that every minute counted. General Kyle Mason coordinated the cleanup operations while simultaneously preparing for the next attack. Intelligence suggested the Empire would return with overwhelming force. Earth's defenses were shattered. The solar hammer could not be used again. Most of their ships were destroyed or damaged beyond quick repair. Dr. Paul Griffin estimated they had perhaps 3 months before the Empire could launch another assault, and this time Earth would not have surprise or desperation on their side. Griffin worked with every scientist who could contribute, trying to develop new defensive technologies, but they were exhausted, running on stimulants and sheer determination. The weapons that had defeated the First Fleet had taken weeks of preparation and had left Earth's resources nearly depleted. Creating something new seemed impossible, yet they had no choice but to try. Captain Ron Hayes and the Valiant were found drifting near Jupiter, main power offline and life support failing. A rescue ship reached them just hours before their air would have run out. Hayes and his crew were brought back to Earth as heroes, but the captain felt only grief for those who had not made it home. Commander Steve Holland and his crew had sacrificed themselves to give Hayes time to gather crucial intelligence. That debt weighed on him constantly. While Earth struggled to recover, Hayes was approached by Commander Natalie Reeves from Military Intelligence. She had been studying the battle recordings and had developed a radical idea. Instead of waiting for the Empire to attack again, what if Earth took the fight to them, not through conventional warfare, which they would lose, but through something humanity had always excelled at? Inspiring rebellion. Reeves explained her plan to President Carter and the military leadership. A small ship with a volunteer crew would travel to conquered worlds and make contact with resistance movements. They would share what Earth had learned about fighting the Empire. They would prove that victory was possible. Most importantly, they would spread the idea that had terrified empires throughout human history. People did not have to accept oppression. They could fight back. The plan was dangerous to the point of being suicidal. Any crew that volunteered would be traveling deep into Imperial territory, with no support and no possibility of rescue if things went wrong. But Hayes immediately volunteered. He had seen what the Empire did to conquered worlds. If there was any chance to help others gain their freedom, he would take it. Lieutenant Amy Cooper volunteered next, followed by Matt Jennings and a linguist named Sophie Clark. The most surprising volunteer was Zekmar, the captured Korthax junior officer who had been helping Earth understand Imperial technology. He explained that he had joined the military believing the Empire brought order and stability to the galaxy. But serving under Vexthor had shown him the truth. The Empire brought only oppression and fear. He wanted to help tear it down, even if it meant betraying his own species. The Valiant was repaired and modified with captured Korthax technology that would allow it to travel undetected through Imperial space. The ship was stocked with supplies, weapons, and most importantly, recordings of Earth's battle. Hayes and his crew prepared to depart on a mission that would take them to a dozen conquered worlds with no guarantee they would ever return home. Before they left, President Carter met with Hayes privately. She told him that what he was attempting might be even more important than winning the battle. Military victory had saved Earth, but inspiring others to resist could change the entire galaxy. She also admitted her fear that the Empire's next attack would succeed. Earth was vulnerable, and she did not know if they could survive another assault. Hayes promised to do everything possible to ensure that even if Earth fell, the idea of resistance would survive. The day before the Valiant departed, a message arrived that changed everything. It came from a species called the Sivari, part of something called the Council of Free Worlds. These were civilizations that had managed to remain independent from the Empire through careful alliances and strong defenses. They had been watching Earth with great interest and now offered to send a delegation to discuss cooperation. Ambassador Thelnora arrived on a ship that made even Earth's most advanced pre-war vessels look primitive. She was a graceful being with translucent skin that seemed to shift colors based on her mood. She met with President Carter and explained that the Free Worlds had been aware of the Korthax Empire for centuries, but had avoided direct confrontation. They maintained their independence through strength and diplomacy, but they had never actively opposed imperial expansion. Earth's victory had changed their calculations. For the first time, a species had not just survived an imperial assault but had actively defeated it. This had inspired hope across the galaxy, but it had also made Earth a target. The Free Worlds could not stand by and watch the Empire destroy humanity. It would send the wrong message and might embolden the Empire to target the Free Worlds themselves. Thelnora offered an alliance. The Free Worlds would share technology and provide military support. In exchange, Earth would work with them to support resistance movements on conquered worlds and help build a coalition strong enough to contain the Empire permanently. It was exactly what Earth needed, but it also meant committing to a much larger conflict than just defending their own world. President Carter accepted without hesitation. Earth had already decided to fight, and having allies only improved their chances. Dr. Griffin immediately began working with Sivari scientists, combining human innovation with advanced alien technology. General Mason coordinated with Free World's military advisors to develop new defensive strategies. For the first time since the battle, Earth had reason to hope they might survive what was coming. The Valiant departed on schedule with its volunteer crew. Captain Hayes set course for Vrex Prime, the closest conquered world with a known resistance movement. As his ship jumped to faster-than-light speed using the captured Korthax drive, he looked back at Earth one last time. The planet was scarred but still beautiful, still free, still defiant. Whatever happened next, humanity had proven something important. They had shown the galaxy that empires could be challenged and that freedom was always worth fighting for. Behind them, Earth prepared for war on a scale they had never imagined. Shipyards worked constantly, building vessels that combined human and alien technology. Soldiers trained alongside warriors from other species, learning new tactics and sharing their own hard-won knowledge. Scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible, driven by the knowledge that failure meant extinction. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had known only oppression for generations, people heard about Earth and began to hope. The impossible had happened once. Perhaps it could happen again. The Empire had seemed invincible, but a primitive species had proven otherwise. If humans could fight back with their limited resources and inferior technology, what could others accomplish if they tried? The question spread Lee. Wildfire through underground networks and whispered conversations, and the Empire began to realize they faced something far more dangerous than a single rebellious world. They faced an idea, and ideas could not be destroyed with plasma cannons or orbital bombardment. The Valiant limped into orbit around a world called Vrex Prime 3. Weeks after leaving Earth, Captain Ron Hayes sat in his damaged command chair, studying the planet below through view screens that flickered occasionally from electrical damage. The world was green and blue like Earth, but its cities showed the distinctive architecture of the Korthax Empire. Massive structures built for control rather than beauty, military installations positioned to intimidate rather than protect. This was a conquered world, and it had been under imperial rule for 3 generations. Hayes turned to his assembled crew, a group far smaller than when they had departed Earth. Lieutenant Amy Cooper stood near the navigation console, her flight suit still bearing scorch marks from the battle. Matt Jennings, the civilian engineer who had volunteered for this mission, worked constantly to keep the ship's damaged systems functional. Sophie Clark, a linguist who had spent the journey studying Korthax communications, held a datapad filled with translations and cultural notes. The last member of their team was unexpected. A Korthax junior officer named Zekmar, who had been captured during the battle and chose to help humanity rather than return to his empire. The mission was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. They would travel to conquered worlds and teach them what Earth had proven. Empires could be defeated. Freedom was possible. Resistance was not futile. But first, they had to survive long enough to make contact with the local resistance, assuming one even existed. Zekmar guided them to a landing site far from Imperial patrols. The Korthax officer had become disillusioned with the Empire after witnessing their brutality on dozens of worlds. He explained that the Vrex people had fought hard when first conquered, but had been broken by overwhelming force and decades of oppression. Their resistance movement was small, scattered, and constantly hunted by Imperial security forces. Hayes led his team into the alien city under cover of darkness. The streets were empty, monitored by automated security systems that Zekmar helped them avoid. They made contact with the resistance through channels the Korthax officer knew, and after tense negotiations conducted in whispers, they were brought to a hidden meeting place deep underground. The Vrex resistance leaders were reptilian beings with scales that ranged from deep green to amber. They moved with careful deliberation and spoke in voices that reminded Hayes of wind through canyon walls. Their leader, an older Vrex named Krell, listened to the human story with obvious skepticism. He had heard rumors about Earth's victory, but rumors were common and usually false. The Empire was invincible. Everyone knew this. Resistance only brought suffering. Lieutenant Cooper showed them the battle recordings. Real footage from the fight, not propaganda or exaggeration. The Vrex watched in silence as human ships, primitive and outmatched, swarmed the Imperial fleet. They saw the solar hammer strike. They witnessed the Liberty's final charge. When the recordings ended, Krell sat motionless for a long time. Then he asked a question that cut to the heart of everything. "How did you find the courage?" Hayes answered honestly. They had been terrified. Many wanted to surrender. But something in the human spirit refused to accept submission when an alternative existed, no matter how slim. He explained that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The Vrex had that same courage. They simply needed to remember it. Matt Jennings shared technical information about how inferior technology could overcome superior force through innovation and desperation. He showed them the designs for the sleeper mines, explained the principles behind the solar hammer, demonstrated the swarm tactics that had confused the Korthax formations. He made it clear that these were not gifts of weapons, but examples of thinking differently. Each species would need to find their own methods based on their own strengths. Sophie Clark learned the Vrex language with remarkable speed and began drawing parallels between human and Vrex history. She found stories in their culture about ancient times before the Empire, when the Vrex had been explorers and artists rather than slaves. She reminded them of who they had been and who they could be again. Her words resonated with the younger Vrex, who had only known imperial rule but carried genetic memories of freedom. Most importantly, Hayes told them something no conqueror had ever said. Humanity was not here to save them. They were not offering to fight the Empire on the Vrex's behalf. Instead, they were here to prove that resistance was possible and to share what they had learned. The Vrex would have to save themselves. That was the only way freedom would last. The resistance began planning attacks on Imperial supply lines. They were small operations at first, testing whether the techniques Hayes described would actually work. When the first convoy was successfully destroyed using tactics adapted from human strategies, something changed. Word spread through the underground networks. Other cells joined the fight. Within 2 weeks, the Imperial garrison on Vrex Prime was struggling to maintain control. The Valiant departed for Talmar IV, another conquered world. There they found an insectoid species that communicated through chemical signals and had nearly given up hope. Cooper and Jennings worked with them to adapt human tactics to their unique biology. The Talmar could move through spaces too small for Korthax soldiers, and could coordinate silently in ways the Empire could not detect. Within a month, Imperial installations on Talmar IV were under constant attack from enemies they could not track. Hayes took his crew to 6 more worlds over the next 3 months. Each species was different, each faced unique challenges, but the message was always the same. The Empire was not invincible. Unity and determination could overcome superior technology. Freedom was worth any price. And slowly, like fire spreading through dry grass, rebellion began to consume the Imperial territories. On Earth, President Helen Carter received an unexpected visitor. A sleek ship arrived carrying Ambassador Thelnora of the Sivari Collective, representing the Council of Free Worlds. These were species that had managed to remain independent from the Empire through careful diplomacy, strategic alliances, and military preparedness. They had watched humanity's battle with great interest and now offered something remarkable: an alliance. Thelnora explained that the galaxy had been dominated by the Korthax Empire for so long that most species had forgotten what real freedom looked like. Some had submitted without fighting, others had been crushed and broken. But humanity had reminded everyone that resistance was possible. The free worlds wanted to ensure Earth survived what was coming next. Because the Empire would return with a force designed to erase humanity from existence, Dr. Paul Griffin met with scientists from a dozen alien species. They shared technologies that were centuries beyond Earth's capabilities. Force field generators, quantum computers, weapons that bent space itself. But the aliens were equally fascinated by human innovations. The concept of the solar hammer amazed them. The willingness to turn civilian equipment into weapons impressed them. The human tendency to find creative solutions under impossible pressure was something they wanted to understand and learn from. General Kyle Mason worked with alien military advisors to rebuild Earth's defense forces. The new ships being constructed incorporated technology from 6 different species, creating hybrid vessels that combined the best of multiple civilizations. Training programs brought together humans and aliens, teaching them to fight as unified forces rather than separate fleets. 3 months after the battle, Emperor Korthax IX made his decision. He assembled a fleet of 2,000 warships, the largest armada the Empire had ever created. He would lead it personally to ensure there were no mistakes. Earth would be destroyed so completely that no trace of humanity would remain. The message would echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years. This is what happens to those who defy the Empire. The Emperor's fleet departed from the Imperial capital with great ceremony, but the galaxy was different now than when the fleet was first ordered. On Vrex Prime, the Resistance had seized control of 3 cities. On Talmar IV, the Imperial garrison had withdrawn to fortified positions, unable to maintain control. On a dozen other worlds, species that had been broken and hopeless were suddenly fighting back. And they all knew where their inspiration had come from. When the Emperor's massive armada arrived at Earth, they found something that shocked them. Earth was not alone. The Free World's fleet stood alongside human vessels. Ships from Vrex Prime, damaged but defiant, had traveled across light years to join the defense. Talmar fighters swarmed in formations that confused Korthax targeting systems. Species from across the galaxy, some only recently freed, others fighting to stay free, had gathered at Earth. They came not because they were ordered to, not because they were paid, but because humanity had shown them something they thought was lost forever. Hope. The battle that followed dwarfed the first engagement. It raged for 3 days across the entire solar system. The Emperor's flagship fired weapons that could crack planets, but it was met by defensive technology. Humanity could never have developed alone. Korthax boarding parties were repelled by soldiers from 6 different worlds fighting side by side. When the Empire's elite guard attempted to land on Earth, They were met by an army that included not just humans but volunteers from species the Empire had once enslaved. Captain Hayes led a combined strike force deep into the Imperial formation, targeting the Emperor's flagship directly. His crew worked alongside Vrex warriors and Talmar specialists, species that had never fought together before united by a common cause. They disabled the flagship's shields using tactics that combined human aggression with alien precision. The Emperor's ship, thought to be invulnerable, burned in space. President Carter broadcast a message across all channels during the height of battle. She did not speak only to the Emperor, but to every soldier in his fleet, every citizen on conquered worlds, everyone watching across the galaxy. She asked a simple question. How many must die to maintain an empire built on fear? How many worlds must burn before they understood that the age of domination was ending? Emperor Korthax IX stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship and watched his fleet take catastrophic losses. For the first time in his long reign, he felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. The species he had dismissed as primitives had sparked a rebellion that threatened the entire imperial structure. Even if he destroyed Earth, the idea would survive. Conquered worlds were already rising. His own soldiers were questioning their orders. The Empire was not losing a battle. It was losing its future. The Emperor made a choice that would define the rest of galactic history. He ordered the retreat, not a tactical withdrawal but a complete disengagement. He broadcast a message acknowledging that humanity and its allies had earned the right to exist free from imperial rule. It was not surrender, but it was recognition that the Empire could no longer expand through force alone. The cost had become too high. The galaxy erupted in celebration. On Earth, billions poured into the streets, crying and laughing and holding each other. On Vrex Prime, the Korthax garrison withdrew peacefully, too shocked by the Emperor's decision to resist. On Talmar 4 and dozens of other worlds, people emerged from hiding and saw their oppressors departing. The impossible had happened. The Empire had backed down. 6 months later, the First Galactic Assembly convened on a neutral world. Representatives from over 100 species gathered to discuss a new order, built on cooperation rather than conquest. President Carter addressed them all, speaking not as Earth's leader but as someone who understood what freedom cost. She reminded them that liberty was not granted by the powerful, but taken by the brave. Captain Hayes returned to Earth as a hero, though he never felt comfortable with the title. He had lost too many friends and seen too much death to celebrate easily. But when children asked him if it had been worth it, he always answered yes. Freedom was always worth the price. Lieutenant Cooper continued flying, now training new pilots from a dozen different species. Matt Jennings worked at a collaborative research station where humans and aliens developed technology together. Dr. Griffin led projects that pushed the boundaries of science in ways neither humans nor aliens could have achieved alone. On a distant world at the edge of what had been imperial space, a young girl looked up at the stars. She was learning about Earth in her school, about the species that had been given an impossible choice and refused to accept it. Her teacher, one of the Vrex, told the students that the humans had taught the galaxy a lesson everyone had forgotten. Freedom is not given by those with power but claimed by those with courage. The girl asked what Earth was like now. The teacher smiled and explained that Earth was still there, still free, surrounded by ships from 100 worlds. No longer alone in the cosmos, but standing as proof that even the smallest can defeat the mighty when they refuse to surrender. The age of empires was ending, and humanity had shown the galaxy what came next. A future built not on domination, but on the right of every species to chart their own destiny among the stars.